My name's Nat, and I work at an organisation called Exceptional Individuals. We support people who are neurodivergent. So mainly things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD. Our definition, and it's different to everyone's, is a different way of learning that is only a disability because of the society we live in and not inherently a disadvantage. So what that kind of means in real terms is that it absolutely is a disadvantage to, have dyslexia and autism, but only because the world is made in a neurotypical way, which makes it harder for you to think the way you think. If the world was a little bit different, it wouldn't be an issue. I've got the whole heap, I've got dyslexia, dyspraxia, a little bit of autism, and I'm very positive I've got dysgraphia. Dysgraphia isn't diagnosed very frequently. We're going to go in a bit more about why that is and why probably a lot more of us have it than we're led to believe, really. We mainly deal with these ones, the main four, and that's because they're the most regularly diagnosed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the others aren't apparent. It's just how many people are able to diagnose. And all of the neurodivergence, which is just different ways of thinking, are kind of standalone, but the likelihood of having more than one really doubles. So it's not uncommon. Now, just so you know a little bit about what we do before we get into this, we help recruit diverse talent. Organizations might be like, we really need some people who think differently because our organization is full of old white men who all think the same. And we'll be like, our specialty. We might help people who think differently, very intelligent, but struggle to find meaningful work, find a job that's right for them. We do assessments in the workplace, predominantly in the UK, but we do cover the whole world. Workshops just like this, and drop-in sessions. I think I'd like to explain a little bit about what I mean by neurodiversity or neurodivergence. A lot of you might think, yeah, I know what it is, I've got it. Or I work with people who have it. But a lot of people seem to have a bit of an outdated definition of it. A lot of people determine it by deficits. So what are the things that you can't do? When actually that's not right at all. Dyslexia isn't just about not being able to read very well, or dysgraphia isn't just about finding writing challenging. It's about the fluctuation of ability. So there may be some things that you do above and beyond. You might be like, for instance, on this graph, really good at maths, but you might struggle in the creative fields. So it's the difference between high and low skills. The thing that makes all these conditions different is that the skills are different. So for instance, I'm terrible at maths, but I'm really creative, but I'm still neurodivergent. Now, the first thing is I'm going to go through the questions, and these are all taken from different official ways of diagnosing dysgraphia. But bear in mind that there's lots of different kind of platforms to diagnose. There isn't like an official standardized one. So all you got to do is just click on your phone, the ones that relate most to you. So on here, how do you hold a pen, pencil, or marker? Which one out of these images, and bear in mind, I spent a lot of time putting nice little GIFs together, do you think best represent you? Okay, cool. Oh, we got 3 in there. Nice, nice.
I have to say mine has changed as I've grown up, because when I was a kid it was more like 2, and then as I had like occupational therapy, and now I write like number 1.
Oh, no, that is interesting and quite common that like a lot of your like symptoms change as you get older. So where something might be more apparent when you're younger, it might disappear as you get older, but it is still there. You've just come up with like coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways I describe dysgraphia to someone is that dysgraphia and dyslexia are not the same thing, okay? Like you can have one and not have the other, but the similarities are there. So dyslexia predominantly is a difficulty in reading. Obviously, I'm simplifying it, but in its essence, a difficulty in reading. And dysgraphia is a difficulty in writing. And though you might, both of them struggle with spelling, for example, but they struggle with spelling for different reasons. Dyslexia is that because you struggle to read, the brain finds difficult to re-pull the information when spelling. Dysgraphia is because you might struggle writing, the brain remembers a lot via writing, And if you're like writing a bit, isn't your strong point, the brain finds it really difficult to remember spellings. So it is quite interesting, and you should start to see as we go along how it's so easy to get too confused. But pencil grip is definitely a big sign of dysgraphia. So if you ever have an awkward grip, or it's kind of painful to write for long periods of time, that's a common trait. I know for me, I used to have like a triangle pen, so I would like be forced to hold my grip. Or I also had like a special little knives and forks that had little like slots to put my fingers on, just to kind of train my body in order to hold pens correctly.
So I keep saying stuff, but that's exactly what my experience was as well.
Cool. No, I appreciate Rachel. Having more opinions, the better, really, because I can only talk from my experience and the people I've supported, but obviously there's far more people who have it.
Can I just ask, because I'm here because of myself, but also for my son.
Yeah.
What you've just described that you use with your pens with the knife and forks, are they actually helpful, or are they a hindrance, or do they actually work?
Good question. So are they just like a gimmick?
Yeah.
Do you know what? I think it really depends on the person. So I didn't find the pens that helpful, to be honest with you, but I did find the knives and forks easy.
Right.
Like, I used them for years, and because I would hold my knife and fork like just stabbing my food, but these, it kind of like, it had like little kind of like slots to put your fingers in, and it kind of taught good habits.
Yeah, I found that they did help for me, and like I only stopped using the special cutlery because it got nicked at uni, but and I never bothered to replace it. But I found it much more comfortable. I find that I have to, with a lot of things, like even knives and forks and spoons and stuff, I prefer thick handles to grip things on, because I find that like really narrow handles can be painful and stuff to push on. So I found them really helpful.
I've definitely graduated from using my special knives and forks, but I do always have like really chunky ones that have like really heavy. I find
me too.
Well, thank you.
On this screen, I don't know if any of you've ever used the whiteboard feature. Nice, because she's done well. Try, if you're able to, I think it's on the settings. I think it's on the annotate button. All I want is for you just to try and write your names on the screen. So, I mean, let me try, because I don't think I've done this before. I'm always getting people vandalizing my presentations, but okay, there we are.
Can you walk me through how to do it? Because I have no idea.
On your options, you've got like your little toolbar. It's on the one that's called annotate.
I don't have that.
I mean, I don't know if I can pull my, if you'll be able, I don't know, can you see on the screen now, the menu bar?
I've got the menu bar at the bottom. Is that what you're talking about?
There should be one called annotate, which is like a little pen next to.
No, it's not on mine.
At the top.
Don't worry. It might be like different versions. But
if you go to view options, and there's one that says annotate.
Yes. Maybe. Yes, I've got it. Thank you.
And this is just a way to demonstrate like what it can be like for those. Obviously, it can't be an exact representation, but a lot of people with dysgraphia will struggle at school, for example, when you've got to write on the whiteboards. And it's because the brain remembers, like if you spend all your life writing on paper, writing on a board is a very different experience, and the brain remembers patterns and motions. So doing it in like a different format can be really a real struggle. And it can also make people feel like less intelligent. So when I write on the board, oh my God, I look like I can barely read or write at all. But actually when I'm on paper, I can do it.
I would say I do that the opposite way around, because I did, well, I did spend 20 years teaching.
Well, yeah.
And my biggest fear was writing in students' exercise books, but I had trained myself really well to get used to the board.
That would explain why you've got the neatest handwriting on here. I guess it definitely is a skill set, but that is a really common trait of someone who is dysgraphic. So definitely intelligent, got all the ideas up here, but when it comes to putting them on the board, it just doesn't match up to what you would expect of someone with that level of thinking abilities.
My problem was definitely writing in other people's books.
Yeah.
I hated it. It was just horrific.
Out of curiosity, are any of you actually diagnosed with dysgraphia? Oh,
No, dyslexia, yes, but
yeah.
dysgraphia, no.
Yeah, no, I'm dyslexic, and I've had an expensive report for it, but yeah.
No, I mean, that makes sense to hear that most of you are, because it's, like I said, it's not very well like diagnosed, or a lot of people with dyslexia, well, a lot of people get just given a dyslexia label. And it's not really as complicated that, because if you've got dysgraphia, but people start giving you support for dyslexia, a lot of the things that they think will be useful to you might not actually be that helpful. And that's why it's kind of good to know. Oh, actually,
For me, the sort of dysgraphic traits that I've seen have been put down to cerebral palsy, but the more that I look at things, the more I think actually there might be two conditions going on. It's not just cerebral palsy.
yeah, and that's the thing. If you've got more than one thing in your life, it can be quite difficult to know what is one thing and what is the other.
Yeah.
Because
my dyslexia as well isn't actually diagnosed as dyslexia, because the guy who assessed me said, because you've got cerebral palsy, I can't give you the dyslexia diagnosis, even though you have the traits, and if you didn't have cerebral palsy, I would. So it's very hard to separate them out and also get diagnoses for other things when you have one thing that can sort of be really wide ranging.
I mean, that is really interesting and also a bit frustrating, because like they are very different. Just some things overlap, and I find that a lot with myself, or when I'm working with people, it's that I really like, officially on paper I've got high function autism, and my dyslexia is not, it's kind of out of date definition, but actually that affects me kind of more, or a lot more. But then again, you take what you can. So on this question, and I see most of you have done it, and I see we've got a few new people who've joined recently. So just go to menti.com and put in this code at the top if you have joined up a bit later. But the question was, when writing quick, I miss out letters, words, capital letters, punctuation. And this, I see actually most of you miss out all of it. And it's interesting, because if you miss out something all the time, that would demonstrate maybe a lack of knowledge, or like maybe you haven't kind of been able to pick that thing up as of yet. But when you know it's like something like dysgraphia, it's that the information is up there, but it's more about how the brain processes. So if you're working really fast, the brain kind of skips out things. So maybe you could skip out letters, words, capital letters, punctuation. It's a bit like when you're typing really fast and then you mess up. It's not that you didn't know the word, it's that the brain wasn't able to catch up with the writing that you were doing. Now, the next one I want to ask you all is, how comfortable is writing or drawing for you? So it's on a scale of comfy to painful, and you just slide it to which one you think best represents you. And this is interesting, because there has been a link between people with like arthritis and dysgraphia. And it's because you might hold at a bit of an awkward angle, that over time it can, wear away the joints. But it's also, some people might unfortunately bleed, or, I mean, that's a rare occasion. Like for me, I just get kind of cramps and I can't write for very long. I can maybe write for like half an hour and then I have to stop. So if you think there's nothing other than you can do everything else in life fine, but when it comes to writing, for some reason that's more painful than you believe it should be, that again could be a characteristic. This though can also translate to things like tying your shoes. It doesn't have to just be writing, but writing is one of the main ones of dysgraphia, because there's a lot of processing going on, from thinking of the idea to having it on paper. This can overlap though, if you guys have ever heard of dyspraxia, and that's also a processing condition, but that's more different because that's more related to like movement in general, where this is not. I mean, they all overlap, to be honest, but there are some key differences, which hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll have a good idea. Okay, next one is putting in order. So on here, you can have like 1, 2, 3, 4. How difficult do you find picking up the following? Now, obviously, Rachel, from your perspective, try and come at it from a dyslexic or like another point of view, because obviously you kind of got a way up here, it makes it tougher. So for instance, a P, a coin, a paper stamp, a credit card. Put number 1 in terms of which one you find the most challenging to pick up.
Let's find out.
Oh, Anya, are you actually trying to pick up stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it, real world examples.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. So we've got credit card being the hardest for most of you, then stamps, then coins and P. Oh no, it's swapping. This is more thrilling than the election. So why is it difficult to pick up awkward shaped objects? Well, it again comes down to how the brain processes information. So things that are different 3-dimensional shape, you might not get the same like haptic like feedback. So say if you've got like a dice, there's lots of different angles and grooves and frictions. But things that are like flat can be very challenging, or different textures. And this is why when you think of support things for those with dysgraphia, you might get like special pen grips, or those like knives and forks, or you might get gloves that have different grips on, because it gives this kind of like consistency. So the brain finds it easier to remember essentially how to pick things up fluidly. These are the items which have been reported to be the most challenging for those who struggle with these sorts of things. A stamp, for instance, because it requires the brain to like pinch it and then kind of go under. It's like multiple rapid actions, unless then you obviously like stick it. Cards, again, very flat, and it requires more movements. It isn't as simple as pick up. You kind of got to slide it. So it's mainly anything that requires multiple processes. Like for instance, if you're picking up an apple, you don't think twice. You're picking up a pea, because a pea is squishy, you've got to be more thoughtful, because you've got to think pressure as well as picking it up. So if you've got dysgraphia, you typically might find things that you need to pick up that have multiple things to take in consideration, whether it's squishiness, whether it's slidability, ripability. I'm making up words here, but you get the gist. So next one is, and this will involve you writing on your smart devices or in our chat if you'd prefer. What excuses do you use to get out of group tasks that involve writing at home or work? So this might be, you're in a group, you're coming up with loads of suggestions, and someone says, Sarah, can you be the scribe? And you're like, are there any things that you just use to get out of it? Or maybe you don't mind it. So yeah, one of you says spelling. Yeah, I was like, I'd love to, guys. So you're just being quite honest about it. Just can't spell. I usually volunteer to be the scribe. Nice. I'm guessing that's Lisa. Oh, really? Okay. Freeze. Yeah, I just run away, head in the sand. I'd rather write than type. Interesting. I think for myself, what do I do? I normally act all confident and be like, do you know what? I think you should do it. You got really nice handwriting. So yeah, just like pass it on to someone else and be really persistent about it. I'm just honest and say I have writing problems and I can't. I'll be honest, best way to do it. I've got a terrible writing. I'm not in the mood for it right now. Spellings and instruction. No, so it seems to me that most of you are quite honest about it. And that is a good way to be. but I'm sure you can appreciate why some people might unfortunately tend to lie. And it's because people think there's a correlation between intelligence and being able to write. If you're a big CEO of a massive company and your writing's all squiggly and kind of like really intense, people make assumptions. And though that's not right, it still happens. And I think that's more to do about the education on the other person's side. But if you're able to be honest and say, you know, I have a different skill set, I'm more able to contribute in this section, you're going to do far better in life.
That's a lovely way of putting it.
I try.
Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you.
Yeah. So on this,
Sorry, can I just interrupt and ask a question?
yeah, go for it.
Just because I'm behind on the seminar and the whole concept. You said something earlier about, forgotten now. Forgotten, it's gone. You said something earlier about pain.
Oh yeah.
So I'm hypermobile, and which is why I prefer to write instead of type, and it does subluxate my shoulder. Like, what is the pain association? I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, now it's not, it's like a result. So if you're doing something a little bit different than how the body was conventionally designed for, it can add more pressure. So for example, with my phone, if I've got dysgraphia, I might hold it extra tight, like tighter than other people would. And on the surface, this isn't an issue, but if you're holding something really tight for a long time, it's going to get painful. So it's just holding things awkwardly for a long time.
And do people tend to have like really tight muscles in general?
I don't know. I don't know that. Like, do they need to have more massages? Are they a bit stronger than the average? I'm not sure, but I think there are a lot of people that have to rest their arms or hands. So for instance, they'll say, I can only do 20 minutes of writing and then they're done.
Yeah, because
but this doesn't, just to confirm this, it doesn't mean about like sports or anything. It doesn't mean that, oh, you can't do it. It's more about the grip and holding things.
And if you drop a lot of things all the time?
Yeah, dropping things a lot, finding things difficult to pick up, having harder grips than normal. Maybe you're drawing with a pencil and you're always breaking the lead, anything like that.
And you said something about processing, sorry, you said something about processing like information earlier. Like, so in an academic sense, for example, I'll read it, but I can't, you know, like I get so immersed in the detail that I can't see the bigger picture. And it just gets quite like, how do I put it on, like put it onto paper? Like I can say it, but when I try to write it, everything's jumbled in my head. Is that more ADHD or is that dysgraphia?
Okay,
information,
yeah, it makes sense. I can never give you a definitive answer for any of these because I'm not a doctor and I wouldn't like to. But what I can say is both of them do overlap. And a lot of it does sound like dysgraphia because it's, again, dysgraphia is more about having the information and how you process it. So the reason why you hold pens awkwardly or you drop stuff is the brain isn't able to make those connections fast enough. Now, if you've got ADHD, the reason why they overlap so heavily is ADHD is the brain just being a lot kind of like quicker. And if your brain is a bit slower in processing and you're naturally faster, you can kind of see how they'd kind of like hit heads. So unfortunately, one does make the other one even worse. It's harder.
Because I just looked at dysgraphia and I'm like, ouch, this is like everything that I've been thinking.
I mean, I like to look at it as neurodivergence it's a big old spectrum. So you might have one thing, but the likelihood is you have a lot of the traits and characteristics. And to be diagnosed with one of these things, you only need to have a handful of them. You don't have to have everything. So if you do all of these questions today and you're like, well, I only had like just under half, that doesn't necessarily mean you aren't, because you don't have to have all of them to, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I'm getting 10 out of 10 for every test these days.
Oh, yeah, congrats.
Finally, made it to the top.
Yeah,
I'll come back. Let's go.
So on here, we've got how difficult you find, oh, well, there's my bad spelling. Oh, grammar. How difficult do you find the following? So we've got using scissors, buttoning clothes, zippering zippers, or tying up a water balloon. And this, as you can imagine, goes very much back to like picking things up. It's any process which requires multiple steps in your head in terms of processing. So a lot of people with scissors will be, you know, like when you're like left-handed scissors, because you're always kind of going wonky and there's a line, but you're not able to follow it. It's so, you know it, like if you say, okay, there's a dot on the screen, go push it, you might push a little bit left or a little bit right to it, and your kind of coordination isn't quite on. So scissors are a big one. It can take a long time to learn. I'd imagine if any of you do have dysgraphia, a lot of these things you might be okay with now, but growing up, it might have took you a little bit longer than average. So I think I wasn't allowed to have scissors when I was younger. Honestly, I could not button clothes for the life of me. I definitely still can't do it with one hand, but I would just really struggle with buttons. Zippers, I could give me like a good 10 minutes trying to like get my zipper in the coat. That's another real classic one. And water balloons, oh my God, as much as I love a good water balloon fight, I wasn't the fastest. I was always the wettest at the end of it.
Can I just ask, does like tying shoelaces come into this as well?
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
that to me sort of is related as well.
No, Rachel, you're spot on. I would always have Velcro shoes. Not anymore, but back in the day.
I now, even though I can tie shoes, and this also, I mean, the cerebral palsy overlaps with this as well, but I now, where I can, just go for like zip up shoes, because it takes me a lot longer to tie the laces. So I just zips are for me. I just find
You've got time for that. It's because if you think about it, think how many steps there are to tying shoes. You need to remember the knots. You've got to have memory. You've got to have the coordination in kind of getting it through the right loops. You've got to have the right grip on the laces. You've got to have enough like tension. There's so many steps in it, and that's why you can be an expert in neuroscience, but you could still have trouble tying your shoelaces.
You need a mad amount of patience, I think.
Yeah. So lots of things.
Does that come under the like? Would that come under the button category?
Yeah. So I would say, yeah, maybe like kind of either a balloon or the buttons in terms of like the same processing it would take. So these are just some examples, but any kind of day-to-day task which is relatively simple for the average person, if you find it unnecessarily difficult, that's normally a sign of, say, dysgraphia.
Organization.
Yeah, it's the way I always think about it. Remember I said it's about like the highs and lows, the peaks. So if you're just struggling with everything in life, well, that might be something else. But if there's just most things you're okay with, but there's certain things which just doesn't make sense why you find harder than others, that's more likely to be like a neurodivergence. Oh, okay, going crazy on the screen there. Okay, here we are. Now, here one, bit of a fun one. What dance style best sums you up? So are you smooth like Snoop Dogg? Are you doing whatever Marge is doing? Or are you like a whiz like Strictly Come Dancing? Baron, I don't know if any of you saw the Strictly Come Dancing recently where they did The Simpsons. Oh my God, it gave me nightmares. It was awful. Now, I'm guessing hopefully a lot of you will start to see a lot of patterns in these things. I'm mentioning lots of different tasks, but the reason behind them are all very, very similar. So it sounds like a lot of you are quite smooth with the dancing. I love dancing, but don't get me wrong, I'm definitely Marge. You know, I'm just, you know, cracking out the dad dancing all over the place. And that comes to kind of grip and tension, because if you're kind of a bit more stiffer overall, you tend to like not be so loose, or you might struggle with processing in terms of coordination. So I would say someone with dyspraxia, maybe ADHD potentially, like any of those, you'll be more of a freestyler.
I'm a pretty good dancer and I'm a DJ, so I don't, how does that tie into any of this?
Well,
Like,
I think, like I was saying, Anya, like just because you don't have all of these doesn't necessarily mean much.
yeah.
Like you can still be an exceptional one. Sometimes you might do something despite of having an added difficulty. Like if you're really passionate about something and you've been doing it most of your life, you're going to be good at it regardless of having any additional challenges. It's
Well, I mean, I had to work a lot harder.
yeah,
Mhm,
you have to work a lot harder. But what I mean is you might not realize you have to work a lot harder because you've been doing it your whole life. Like how are you meant to know someone else's experience? But I could see that. But I remember I did tap dancing for 7 years growing up, and oh my God, never got any better. It was torture. Now I just kind of stick to my grooves. All
And
right.
can this develop later in life, like this particular dyslexia, or is it something
No,
that's
so it's a good question. They're lifelong conditions. So if you've got it, you've got it from birth. But sometimes it's more apparent when you're younger because you're still learning and your brain is developing and as you're trying new things out, so it gets less apparent as you get older. But maybe there could be, we work with a lot of people who, let's say they're in a construction trade their entire life, and when that trade eventually collapses and they have to go into like admin or writing, then they realize that, oh, I do have dyslexia. And it's not because they didn't have it before, it's just the difficulties which are associated with it, they never really had to deal with. And so maybe if you're trying something new and you're having challenges, it might be that they were always there, you just never really picked up on it.
and you're studying something a lot deeper as well, so like a lot more.
Yeah.
You can go down the rabbit hole a lot easier. Yeah.
All right, well, on this one, with a nice little picture of Pingu, are there any words that you're always misspelling? And this will be a good question where I can explain how it's different to dyslexia, where you can also struggle with spelling. And I see we've got Matt who's joined the chat. Hello, Matt. Matt's a founder of Exceptional Individuals, so always nice to have him.
Hi. Sorry I'm late. I had another presentation, but this was really good.
Nice. Oh, okay, brilliant. So we've got Michael, and I always struggle with Michael. And guess what? One of my best friends growing up was called Michael, and my godson is called Michael. I'm always getting the E and the A muddled up, and Michelle as well.
That's me, and my dad's called Michael.
Oh,
never get his name right.
I know, that's the thing, even if you spell it like all the time. Another one for me is Daryl. I always get Daryl spelled wrong. Exceptional, no, individuals, I'm always getting that spelled wrong.
Yeah.
You've got Michael, occasion, necessary, separate, collar, experience. So I'm seeing there's a lot of words here which they're all a decent size. And why do you get it spelled wrong? Well, if you've got dyslexia, it might be that the brain sees the word and it struggles to like piece it together when reading because the brain kind of confuses it. And thus, when you're spelling it, you're kind of remembering the way you read it. So you're spelling it wrong in that way. But with dysgraphia, it's different because you could be an exceptional reader and be dysgraphic. But as I mentioned earlier, when you're writing, say you're like writing your name and your brain is remembering the patterns, the way you do the letters. And if you do it a bit like wonky or kind of hard to read, when it comes to spelling it, your brain is unable to visualize it. So no matter if you've got dyslexia or dysgraphia, you still can't spell, but the reason why you get the wrong spelling is different. An exercise which a lot of teachers will do, or parents, is they'll like teach their kids to like do the letters, so spell out their names like physically, like do really big letters or like really small, and it's again to get the brain to remember the kind of the patterns and the swirls of the letters. So I had to spell like Nathaniel, which is my full name, out all the time, just to learn the pattern. So when it came to the spelling, because I got dyslexia, I don't actually remember the structure of the word. I remember the image of the word. And just like drawing pictures, I had to learn the picture. Oh wow, is that nausea? I can't. Yeah, no, separate. Admittedly, these are some very difficult words, and I'm just going to assume you spelt them all right.
That's nauseous. Yeah, I couldn't remember how to spell it.
All right. Now, this is very similar to the one we said where you had to write your names, but on this one, I'd like you all to have a go at drawing a picture of a cat. And this, I'll explain this in a minute, but basically the parts of the brain that deals with writing and drawing are very different, even though you think they're more similar than they are. I might actually join you on this and have a go. On the blue one.
I've got two cats. Brothers, like.
I like that. I've got two cats. I mean, do you actually have a cat in the house?
I've got two. And I'm like, how do you draw a cat?
I love cats. Are they around at the moment?
No. They seem to just sleep all day.
Oh, I love them for it.
They're fun. Yeah, they're fun.
Do you know what, guys? We've got some pretty good cats here.
This one's this one.
Well, while you guys are still playing with your cats, the reason why I asked you this is that sometimes you might, it's quite common to be an exceptionally good drawer, but have despicable handwriting, like really unlegible handwriting. And it's because, you know how it's complex and it's not really necessarily true, but say there's a left brain and a right brain, and one is more creative and one is more kind of like analytical. And that's the reason. So that you're using a different bit of the brain when it comes to drawing. So if you see someone who's a really good drawer, that doesn't mean that just because they're able to hold the pen correctly in that regard, that they aren't dysgraphic. So it's quite a common way that if someone has a deficit in one area, that they'll put more energy into a different part to compensate. This is why a lot of people with dyslexia or ADHD or any of the neurodivergence tend to be quite creative, not because creativity is inherently part of the condition, but normally it's a result of living with more like challenges. But to say that we're all creative is not true, but to say that we're all creative problem solvers, I would say is pretty universal. Okay, I'm going to erase all your cats now. They've been beautiful, but I'm it. Sorry, guys. There we... Oh, nice. All right. What is something you can passionately talk about? And this, again, this relates more to ADHD. So something which, without no trouble, if someone got you started on it, like don't get me started on the weather, you know, you could just talk to the cows come home. I think for me, it's probably the Beatles. Beatles, politics, my rabbits in the garden. You know, I can talk all day about them. So, okay, childhood experiences. Nice, a bit of a nostalgic one. Politics, lots to talk about at the moment. Disability, so hopefully for like being an advocate. And while you guys are thinking of a few others for those, when I said this one relates more to how ADHD overflows, is that with ADHD, it's that the brain is more excited by different like topics or different stimuli than others. So where someone could have a really boring presentation and you'd be able to follow it, with ADHD, unless the brain particularly stimulated by the subject matter or the way that the information is presented, the brain kind of like short wires and it just loses interest. And the similar thing could be said with parts of dysgraphia. And, you know, if you do like really interesting handwriting, like big shapes, kind of like more like deeper, darker lines, you're more expressive in your writing, so there tends to be more swirls, or kind of like, you know, you like doing little dots, like little circles for the eyes. This can be a way to express oneself when having challenges with writing. I know for me, I always do little circles for my eyes rather than dots, because I just find it a bit more fun to do, and it makes the process of writing more of an enjoyable one. The consequences of that, though, is that it you know, it looks a bit childish. Like, you know, when you do little hearts above the letters. So if there's anything you can talk really passionate about and you don't get stimulated by other areas, that can be kind of a borderline ADHD. It could be related to like autism. These things all kind of overlap, where you kind of got blinkers on your eyes. So yes, when other people talk, you are listening, but if someone says something which particularly ignites your interest, you're going to be so much more engaged, and you'll find it difficult to drop that that stream of consciousness, even though when the conversation has long moved on. ADHD and comorbidity, PhD, nice. NLP, is that learning practice?
Neurolinguistic programming.
Oh, very niche. I love it. Disabilities, brilliant. So yeah, being passionate is one of the positive things I would say of neurodiversity or neurodivergence, is that nearly everyone who I met who has neurodivergence tends to have one area where they're particularly passionate or interested, sometimes on a really micro level. Well, I can pretty much tell you every month of John Lennon's life from birth to death. Not particularly useful, but you know, I can. Oh, okay, on this bit, I just want you to have a wiggle. You know, oh, come on, Matt, you can do better than that. Yeah, nice. But, and this, okay, we might get a seizure, so I'll quickly go back to the other screen. But now, the reason why I wanted you to have a wiggle is, one, because it keeps everyone engaged and interested, but two, that's a really good way to re-stimulate the brain and the muscles if you have dysgraphia. Because think of it about being tense and kind of holding like grips or struggling with writing. If you'll keep doing it and told to do it for hours at an end, one, it'll be a bit painful. Two, you're going to be really annoyed. And three, it might actually ruin your experiences for the future. People need to be continuously doing, like, to reset the brain. So if you're struggling with something, stop it, walk away, have a cup of tea, and then come back to it. Don't be one of those people that are like, I'm just going to push through it, because in the end, it actually could do more damage than good. Okay, we'll quickly go past Zoidberg. We're almost there, so everyone hold on. Using a random assortment of letters, lines, and spaces between words, type your name. So you know when you might do, like, I put an N with an @ symbol and a T. So using the keyboard or your phone, what is a really creative way of typing your name? Oh, I can definitely see a Rachel in there. Sarah, nice. Oh, $, very much Keshery. Lisa. Oh, Lisa. Wow.
I know. You guys, I know, like China, that's how I usually.
Oh yeah, just you guys are breaking my dyslexic brain at the moment.
I'm really good about this, to be honest.
Well, this is to demonstrate that people with dysgraphia typically get letters confused, like B, D, P, Q, B, you know, any ones which are quite similar, which can be written like back to front. So for like dog, you might put bog, you know, words that are very different, but just because the physical letters are quite easily mistaken, that is a very common characteristic. or you
But
might.
that also, sorry to interrupt,
Oh, no, sorry.
I get M for mother and B for Bertie mixed up a lot. And then would that come into it or not?
Do you know what? I don't know. I can see why many people wouldn't get that mixed up because they are quite different. But then again, if your brain, for whatever reason, just kind of like embedded in your subconscious that
It's like my and by. I I scramble those two. I switch them around a
like
lot.
dyslexia, you're more likely to get words that sound the same muddled up. So like sounding, but with dysgraphia, it's very much to do with the actual symbol.
Fair enough.
For example, if you've got like in China, it might be completely different because the symbols are different. I don't know how similar or dissimilar they are to each other, but in our language, it's very common to get things that, like you might, for instance, put a question mark and an exclamation mark in the wrong order. Now, this isn't because you don't understand what the symbols mean. This is because the brain gets confused between the actual letter, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And this is what I really can't highlight enough, that it is very much not about intelligence. With all these things, you either have the potential to learn or you have the knowledge. It's about how that knowledge is expressed. So that is all of the main part. Now I'm just going to go over the next things. Great. I'm pretty sure I've got dysgraphia. What now? And hopefully we can round this up and finish on time. So first of all, you can always come to exceptional individuals. And this is a bit of a promo, but also might be useful to a lot of you. So you're trying to find a job, but you're worried that the handwriting is so bad that no one will give you a position. Well, come to us. We might be able to give you some advice and feedback. We've got workshops just like this, completely free of charge, all planned already for next year. So do have a look at them. We cover pretty much every neurodivergence I can think of. Consultancy for companies. So if any of you have an organization and you think they need to step up their game and work a little harder, get in contact. We can always have a friendly conversation with them. And just one-to-one support. So you can actually book in a time to us and spend 1 hour with us free of charge, just to talk about your needs and how we might be able to help you in the workplace or find new employment. And it honestly is completely free. It's part of our like social mission. Now, if any of you, this is a bit more of a niche one, but I think it's worth mentioning. If any of you are in the UK and currently in work, either self-employed or working, you can actually get access to the government grant, Access to Work. And a lot of people are very familiar with it when it comes to physical health, but it also applies to hidden disabilities. So anything that is covered under the Equality Act 2010, which things like dyslexia, ADHD would cover. And it's not, you normally get around about £4,500 worth for training or equipment. And I would say if you're entitled to it, you should go for it. I have things that allow me to dictate for me, read things back. If you want like special pen grips, like we mentioned, you can get the grant to pay for them instead of you having to pay for it out of your own pocket. But there's more information on our website, which is at the bottom. And I recommend you find out about it if you think this could be relevant. Now, oh yeah, on this bit, you guys can rate how you found today's session. Bear in mind, I'm watching, so feelings will be hurt. Jokes, you know, you can be honest. Yeah. And any feedback you can all, 5 out of 5, nice. Matt didn't sabotage it, that's good to see. No, he's going to go quickly before it changes. I'm going to go. Now, for this, if you ever want to get in touch with us, all you need to do, you can go to our website, and that's where you can book a one-to-one with us, ask some questions. You can always email us. If you're in the UK, feel free to pick up the old dog and bone and give us a call. Oh, lots of loves, I like that. And as always, we've got our social medias. Now, with 2 minutes to spare, if any of you either verbally or not have any questions, are like, just ask. Yeah, so do any of you have any questions? Anya says, who diagnoses this? Now, it really depends on your country, where you're from, your local area, but typically it's an occupational therapist as well as a few other professionals. It's not very widely diagnosed, but a good starting point could be, if you have autism and ADHD characteristics, then going to your GP, they're normally pretty well informed on those subjects. If you have like things like dyspraxia, they might not be as clued up. So that's when I would go to like your local charities or organizations that work with these sort of conditions. So yeah, it's not a straightforward answer, I'm afraid. Normally it's like a secondary thing you're diagnosed with rather than like a primary thing.
I think what I'm reading here is just like the spatial awareness. I've suddenly started getting like mad vestibular issues. Like vestibular, I had like a really bad episode and then it became every day. And apparently that's to do with this sensory overload all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Well, these are all symptoms. And then the eye tracking. So I guess reading, and my brain just shuts down, it goes offline. So this is kind of resonating a lot.
And I think, now that you know this information, it's like, what do you do with it? Well, I would only recommend getting a diagnosis if you think it negatively impacts your life. If you're able to live your life great how it is, and you just want to know more about your brain, then being informed is normally good enough. And under, like I said, the Access to Work scheme, a lot of the time you don't actually need proof, you just need to resonate. Carla has just said, in the US, an educational diagnostician in schools, so that's what you do in the US apparently, so thanks for that, Carla. Learning about this and understanding that, yeah, if I resonate with all these things, you do not need to go out and get a bit of paper that says you have it. Just researching what would support someone with dysgraphia. Now, those things could help you also, regardless of whether you have it or not. And that's what I go for. I'm not officially diagnosed with it, but I'm pretty sure I have it. But all the things that help people who are diagnosed also helps me. And that's kind of good enough. But it's a very personal decision, each to their own.
I guess it's just like, 11th diagnosis. That's like a...
Yeah. These aren't like Pokemon cards. I don't want you going and like collecting all the diagnoses.
This has just all been coming under ADHD for me.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you've already got an ADHD diagnosis, any help that you would be able to get for dysgraphia, you'd already be eligible for. So you probably wouldn't see any added benefit.
In Australia, like they're really fighting hard for ADHD to be recognized as a disability.
Oh,
so like something like this, it sort of gives much more detail on how it can impact your life. Like just what I've got in front of me. Whereas ADHD, I think it's just like, it's behavioral, can be controlled seriously.
Yeah, with all these things, they're very misunderstood. And I think coming to today is a really good first step, because first we need to understand our own minds. And then second, we can help educate others. But again, I'm going to have to wrap up now because we just hit 1 o'clock. But I hope you enjoyed today and got some use out of it. You've been such a lovely group.
It's been really, really interesting. And it's been one that I've been wanting to come to for a long time. So thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. Everyone, stay safe and see you soon.
Thanks, Nat. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.